Hello and welcome to Alaska's Political Pipeline. I'm political reporter Will Courtney, and sitting down alongside me I have Senator Mike Cronk. Senator Cronk, you're the minority leader representing Token Northway, a Republican. And you're a little bit new to minority leadership as well, a little bit new to the Senate as well, to my understanding. You've been a lawmaker for about 6 years. Welcome to the program, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate taking the opportunity to do this.
I want to start maybe a little bit on, you were one of the first interviews I got to do when I came not only to Alaska, but also to the legislature as well. And I'm sitting here in your amazing office. You got a whole lot to kind of show me around. So tell me a little bit about what we're looking at here.
Oh, my office is kind of a reflection of me. I grew up in Northway, or sort of rural Alaska, and we hunted and fished and trapped and just kind of lived the Alaska lifestyle. And I kind of bring that to my office. I want to share that with people. It's a lifestyle that I love, and it's Alaska, and I just want people to walk in and hopefully they feel comfortable and think it's cool. And so just kind of bringing a little sense of home with you down here.
Is this all pelts that you've acquired yourself that you've hunted?
Most of them are. The deer in here and the walrus and the bear out there they belong to Mel Gillis. He's a friend. He used to serve here and he left them here. So it's nice to be able to share those down here. But yeah, most of it is mine.
Good deal. Well, let's talk a little bit about what we're looking at this legislature. By the time this comes out, it'll be next week. So as of time of recording, I believe it's April 9th. A lot happening in the legislature, a lot on the horizon too. We're now entering the last kind of third of the legislature. Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are on the state of the caucus at this moment.
Our caucus?
Yeah.
Being in the minority, there's 6 of us obviously, and honestly, the majority doesn't need our votes for a whole lot of anything. I mean, if they have the votes, but we really appreciate the majority working with us, keeping us informed on things, and they're willing to listen to us, and that's really appreciative. I mean, no matter which party we are, we all have to work together. We have a common goal of doing what's best for Alaska. So, and I think that's, as a minority caucus, our that's our focus too, is what conservative values can we bring and stay focused on those. And that's not always agreeing with everybody, obviously, but that's kind of, we want to stay in those lanes.
Yeah, and a lot on the docket this session, a whole lot. Yeah. It's a question of how much can actually be accomplished this session. So tell me a little bit about what your priorities are, as well as what the state minority parties' priorities are.
I am the minority leader, but I always want to say I do speak for myself, right? Because sometimes we do disagree on stuff, but I mean, we do it in a really good way. We just choose to disagree. I think if we wanted to look at one issue as a minority caucus, it's how do we reduce energy costs in Alaska? And how do we keep our budget relatively constrained with the revenues that we have. And if we hadn't gone into this war, we'd be in a totally different place right now. So, but I think our focus needs to be on the next 50 years, not today, not tomorrow. It's like our focus should be on our kids and our grandkids. What are we doing today to make sure that they can stay in this state? I love my state, and I think everybody here does. But we want to make sure our kids and our grandkids have a place to stay that is affordable.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the biggest questions as well. Obviously, you mentioned energy costs. That immediately makes me think about the gas line. But there's even these bigger conversations about revenue streams and how right now we are very reliant on oil, which for the moment is great, but it could be just as detrimental to the state's budget tomorrow if prices go down, which there is a little bit of threat now with the potential opening of the Strait of Hormuz. So tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are on different revenue streams. Are there any ideas that are really interesting to you, or do you think there still needs to be a lot of work on that front?
Obviously, we are a resource state, and oil has been our lifeline, and it will continue to be. Thank goodness we have it. I think for the most of us, we want to look at some sort of plan, right? A revenue plan that also has a spending cap, right? We can't just continue spending. And then per se, the plan could be taxing people, right? And we want to keep your taxes low. We want to make sure people have as much money in their pocket as, because we do have it's an expensive state to live in. So I think it's kind of all of the above. You can't just burdening people with taxes and then continue spending. So, we want to have a common sense approach of getting there where, yeah, if we do need these revenue streams, we can have those, So I think it's a conversation we should be having. But right now it seems like we're just focused on how do we get more money out of anything, right? Per se oil taxes, I find that as a happy medium. Is like we want these companies here. It costs billions of dollars to develop fields. It's a very expensive environment to pull oil out of the ground, right? So it's kind of a happy medium. What do we take and what do we give, right? So I think that's kind of an all of above approach.
Yeah, and then there's the conversation of this big gas pipeline as well, of course, that's been dominating a lot of discussion here in the legislature. The Senate majority has been very vocal on it. Senator Myers and Rasher also sit on that committee as well, the Senate Resources Committee, where a lot of this conversation is really had. I'm curious what your thoughts are currently on the gas line. Obviously, there's a lot of calls for information about what Glen Farm, the major developer, should be kind of presenting to the legislature. Do you think that we need more information and, just even bigger, your thoughts on this very big property tax bill?
I'm a big fan of the gas line, right? The last major thing we've done in Alaska was TAPS, and that, people might not realize that the only reason we have a Trans-Alaska Pipeline is because the vice president cast a vote. Spiro Agnew cast one vote to decide that. And obviously it's transformed our state, with the revenue and stuff. I'm a big fan of the gas line. I'm a big fan of lowering our energy costs. It's a must. Glen Farm is a private company, right? And it's not like Alaska's taken on the financial burden of building this gas line. So there's a lot of information that I think they need to keep because they're the ones that have to develop contracts with labor and selling gas and stuff. And you can't divulge some of that information if you're trying to get the best deals for stuff as a company. So I think there's a happy medium of what info do we need and what do we not need.
Yeah.
So, but I'm a big fan of, the pipeline would run down and, I represent the interior in Fairbanks. The energy costs in Fairbanks are off the charts and we're pushing for that spur line off this gas line to make sure that, Fairbanks has this cheaper energy to move forward. So I'm a big advocate of it.
Absolutely. And before we go on to our break, I want to ask you a little bit, we hit it a little bit at the top of this conversation, but about bipartisan compromise. I mean, as minority leader, if you want to get your ideas across the finish line, you need to reach across the aisle. Now, from what I've seen with the Senate, is very different than how the House is operating when it comes to the different caucuses. Tell me a little bit about what your approach is to working with the other side of the aisle to make sure that the priorities that you want are ultimately getting across.
Yeah, I think the Senate's a little different. I mean, it's more. I don't look at the House as a bipartisan. You have like two Republicans join. You know what I mean? The Senate's a little bit more. It's like 8 Democrats, I think, or 9 and 6 or whatever the numbers are. So I don't think it's quite, it's more bipartisan, true bipartisan. And I think some people in there kind of value our same values, but they're more willing to listen and we do a lot of work in our offices versus on the floor. I think that's the difference with the bodies. And I just appreciate, again, them, being willing to listen and say, hey, that's a good idea. My baseline is not politics. My baseline is it good for Alaska? So you'll see me probably support things that other people won't. But my vision is this good for Alaska, right? Not Republican, Democrat. Is it good for Alaska? So that's kind of how I base a lot of my decisions.
And is that essentially your approach to being a lawmaker and legislating? Ultimately, your North Star is going to be what's good for Alaska?
Absolutely, 100%.
Absolutely. Good deal. We'll be right back with Senator Mike Cronk. Welcome back to Alaska's Political Pipeline. I'm sitting down with the Senate Minority Leader, Mike Cronk. Sir, I want to ask you a little bit about home. I want to ask you a little about Tok and Northway. I got the great privilege of driving through Tok on my way to Juneau, going up and then straight down, down the Panhandle. Got to go to Fast Eddie's. Delightful food.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about home.
Most people may not know, I grew up in Northway. My dad was in the Air Force on Elmendorf, and he retired, and he was an air traffic controller. So he went to FAA school, and one of his options for a job was Northway. And they had, it was the port of entry at the time for all small aircraft. So they had to clear customs, so it was very busy. So that's where we ended up, and it kind of shaped me for where I'm at right now in life. you're in a small place, and especially for sports, you know, we all my teammates, we played hockey and basketball, and we were pretty close, and basketball was really important. And like in rural Alaska, basketball is pretty much the sport. And it was an opportunity for me to show the state of kids in a small place can make it, right? And I was always doubted, right? And that's kind of what drives me for what I'm at right now, is like when you're always told no, you're not good enough, or this is where you're from, it's not quite there. You know, I'm just gonna be like, I'll show you, let's prove it. We're gonna get there. So
for maybe a little bit of context about me, probably the most rural place I've ever lived is Juneau, Alaska, which is not very rural, right? I've lived in Anchorage, and then I lived in Indiana, but Indiana was not nearly as rural as anything in Alaska. So tell me a little bit about what life growing up. You were in 4th grade when you moved to Northway.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what life looked like growing up in rural Alaska.
You know, I look back and say, man, it was like the perfect place I could have grown up, because I just was immersed in fishing and hunting and trapping and everything outdoors. You know, as I grew up, I bought a 3-wheeler, brand new Honda Big Red 3-wheeler, and got to just really truly enjoy the outdoor life. You know, and it's a hard life, you know, but the local people, you know, the local, you know, Upper Tanana Athabascans, you know, took us all. I mean, we were a big family. It didn't matter if you were native or white. Everybody, we had an amazing school, and everybody took you in, and they, you know, they taught you the ways of life, and you know, I still reflect that with my own. I have 4 daughters, and they went hunting and trapping and fishing, and you know, it's something that I just want to carry on. It's a life, you know, it's kind of a love for life out there, and I just appreciate the people that have, you know, taken me under their wing.
And you have roots in education as well. Tell me about your path through being a teacher, right? You were a teacher?
Yep. Yeah, that decision was made because of the teachers I had, you know, and coaches, and they came to Northway, and most of them stayed, you know, 10 years. A couple of them stayed, just stayed. You know, they loved it so much. It was such a cool area and great people, but they really dedicated their life. And, you know, as I went through college, I was actually focusing on my baby becoming a trooper, but then I'm like, you know, they gave so much to us, so I just decided to become a teacher. It was a really good decision for me, because I really love working with kids and you know, giving back to your community.
Yeah, and obviously that's such a top issue here. This session, probably sessions past this one too, unfortunately. So, or fortunately or unfortunately, right now it seems a little bit unfortunate. But tell me, you ran for office for the House in 2020.
Yep.
You were sworn in 2021. You've been in office ever since. A little bit new to the Senate side, right? Tell me a little bit about why you ended up initially running for office.
You know, I mean, part of it refers back, I mean, it might be a question later on, but the Vegas shooting was a big factor in running for office. But one of them was I ran for our regional school board, and we got to come to Juneau. I'd never been to the Capitol, right? And we came down here, you know, with the superintendent and a couple school board members, and we didn't come asking for money. We came to show the legislature what we were doing in our school district. And my rep at the time was Dave Tallarico from Healy, and we hit it off. It was like we lived the same, you know, same interests, and he kind of approached us, hey, I kind of want to get out of this, you know. I retired from being, you know, work and mayor and stuff, and we just hit it off, and that's how what started. It's like, okay, cool, I'll do this, and he was a big help in getting elected, and here I am.
And District R, correct?
Senate District R, yeah.
So
at the time, I think the House district was 6.
Okay.
And then, you know, obviously with redistricting, things changed, and it's 36.
It's 35, 36 now.
Yeah.
Senate. So obviously that's such a massive district compared to many other lawmakers in your chamber, but also just the House as well, obviously. Tell me a little bit about what it's like to represent such a large district. I mean, district that's probably the size of some other states.
California.
California.
It's very difficult, and there's many different needs, right? I mean, because the district, you know, goes from McCarthy to Arctic Village down the Yukon, you know, and it's mostly rural, but I do represent West Fairbanks in District 35 and Goldstream Valley in 36. So there's many different needs and wants, right? And it's a juggling act of what are we doing to make sure we're addressing all the constituents, and you just can't be everywhere at one time, you know? And I know the people of Fairbanks probably, hey, we want to see you more, but it's such a vast district that, I it's hard to do that, but I want to make sure they know that we are always have a presence somewhere, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a difficult, lots of fly-in communities on the rivers and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
it's very difficult to get around.
And then balancing that with the needs of the state too, because obviously the needs of the state are so broad and massive, and we're seeing a lot of them just being discussed about. But the needs of the communities are a lot different than the needs of the state as well. So how do you kind of weigh that balancing act when there are needs in Anchorage, but you don't represent Anchorage, and
Right.
you're, even growing up, you did live in Anchorage,
Yep.
but since fourth grade, that's life in Toke Northway.
Yeah,
Extremely
totally
different.
Yeah, yeah. It here's my baseline. I am a senator for District R, right? Mainly the whole interior, the Copper River Valley. My baseline is Alaska, though, right? And the way I look at it, if somewhere needs our attention, I'm going to support that. If it's good for Nome, it's good for Alaska. And I don't want to ever leave my district out because we do have needs, but it's kind of like the storm out, Western Alaska, right? You feel for those people. That's not my district, but I'm going to support those people because if that happens in my district, I want the support on my side. So I think Alaska has to be our, like you said, the North Star. That's what has to be your focus.
Yeah. What are the differences in your experience between working in the House and working in the Senate? Or
I
guess
was in the
which-
I was in the House for 4 years,
Okay.
and I really enjoyed it. But there's twice as many people. You got 40 people over there, and I think one of the factors people may not realize, you run for election every 2 years, and so you're basically always kind of campaigning, and it seems like the Senate side has half the people, and they're a little bit more cordial of getting things done behind closed doors than versus on the Senate floor. So it makes it a lot cleaner. But those people care also in the House, right? I've been there. I know. I don't miss it, but sometimes,
Sure.
sometimes. But they still have a job to do, and they're doing the best they can. So I have the appreciation of both sides.
Yeah. And as of right now, which is going to be different than when this conversation comes out, we're seeing a lot of talk in the House, a lot of debate. As of recording, we're on day 2 of the budget discussion. That will eventually come to your chamber as well. What are you kind of thinking, just very preliminarily, on what we're seeing in the House?
I am thinking that the Senate will clean up some of the stuff. There's probably a little bit too much spending, and I don't know what the target is. Obviously, I'm not in the majority of the Senate of what they want to build their budget on. Is it going to be $70 a barrel? Is it going to be $73 a barrel? Yes, we have the revenue coming in, but eventually it's going to go back. The price of oil is going to drop. So we got to make sure that we're not building a budget that we can't pay for. Yeah. So we appreciate the House, obviously, and a lot of their wants. I mean, sometimes you don't get all the stuff you want, right? And you have to have some constraints. So I'm looking, for the Senate to having those constraints and working with the House and make sure the important stuff is.
And then one last question before break. Obviously, so much talk about the PFD currently in this proposed budget. Again, as of conversation, this could be very different when this gets published. But as of when we're talking right now, $3,800 PFD. Do you think that's possible?
No.
Yeah.
If we want to pull out of savings, and I don't think that should be a prerogative of any of us to pull out of our minimal savings that we have of $3 billion. I don't believe so, and it is. I love a PFD. My constituents, can use a PFD, but the reality is we have a big state, and it does cost a lot to do what we do.
Yeah.
If the money's there, great, but pulling out of savings, I don't think is a very good thing.
Yeah. We'll be right back. And we're back with Senate Minority Leader Mike Cronk. Last little bit of this conversation, I was reading your bio, and there were a few things that stuck out to me. The first thing was saying that you have traveled to Czechoslovakia, Namibia, Mexico, and Canada. What led you to those travels?
Well, actually, in high school, when I graduated, that summer I had made its tour team, a basketball team. So we were initially supposed to go over to Norway, Finland, and Sweden, but Chernobyl happened in '86.
Oh,
so
wow.
in '87 they changed it, so we went to Belgium, Germany, and Czechoslovakia. And Czechoslovakia was still communist at the time. Yeah. So what an amazing experience to go over there and see those people living that life. They loved us over there. They loved Americans. They just wanted freedom, you know, especially in the communist part of Czechoslovakia. I'll never forget that trip, but Canada is right next door to Norway, right? So we
Yeah.
drove across all the time. But Namibia, me and my dad went over hunting over in Namibia. So it was a beautiful country.
What did you hunt?
A lot of plains games.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and there's in the picture there's a kudu right there. One of the
Oh no!
kudu.
Oh yeah,
So-
no. There's some exotic animal.
yeah.
right
So we went over
there.
twice actually in 2005, 2007.
No kidding.
Yep. So.
And I guess what are your takeaways from rural Alaska? Obviously, probably very different than rural Namibia. What's it like, kind of seeing those?
Interesting is really, I mean, rural Namibia was very, very poor, right? But similar lifestyle, like, they subsisted off of game and stuff like that, but much poorer, right? But it was still very rewarding to go over there and see that, and the people were thankful. We brought a lot of extra stuff with us so we could leave, like extra clothes and stuff, and people were very appreciative over there.
Do you feel like there's any value to seeing other countries and other forms of government when you're a state lawmaker and kind of, maybe confined is the wrong word, but you're obviously subject to not only just Alaska laws, but also federal laws as well, versus maybe being in Congress, you're subject to just congressional laws, and you're able to really just change the whole fundamental system.
Yeah.
What's it like seeing other countries and other forms of government as your current position?
Everywhere I went, I was, whether it was Europe or even in Africa, I loved the experience, but I was so thankful that I lived in America. Still, despite our problems we have, we still do live in the most amazing place in the world, country in the world. And so I was always thankful to come home, but very thankful to see the experiences and how other people live. And you're always like, how can we make things better, right? That should be our goal, no matter where we're at. So, yeah.
Your bio also mentions October 1st, and obviously quite a traumatic day, the Las Vegas shooting at the Route 91 Harvest Festival. That day, you worked to save people's lives. You did save people's lives, including your own friend. It's been almost 9 years since that day. What does that day mean to you 9 years later?
It's a tough day. It's the day after my birthday. My birthday was on the 30th of September. And so it's always tough. It's sometimes hard to talk about, but it changed my life, and it really probably was a driver of becoming a legislator, because there were so many people that just didn't know what to do. They were, I don't want to say totally helpless, but they're really helpless. And it really impacted them. There's still people today affected by Route 91 and the shooting. And, we lost 58 people that day. It was tough, you're seeing people, and like my friend was shot, and you're doing everything you can to get them out, and make sure people live. And it's a long story. We could talk about some other time. I could tell you more details, but there was no medical service there because it was an active shooting zone, and so there was no ambulances. So we were loading people up in trucks and trying to get to a hospital. And we had a young man in the back of a truck with my friend and some other people that passed away as we got him into the ambulance. So I was asked, hey, by the paramedic, can you remove this young man? He was 19 years old. I didn't know who he was. Sure, I carried him out of the ambulance, sat on a curb with him, and I wasn't going to leave him. It's somebody's son, right? And I found out eventually, I haven't met them yet. I've only been back once to Vegas, but it's time to go back and, kind of relive what happened. And
When did you go back?
2019.
And what was the reason for that?
Just to go back, and it was actually during NFR, National Finals Rodeo in December, and Cowboy Christmas, and it was a lot of fun.
Sure.
But I purposely avoided the area where the shooting was, right, outside of Mandalay Bay and stuff, and it was probably time to go back and address that, and probably meet with the parents of this young man. His name was Quentin Robbins. That we were there in his last seconds of his life.
And you mentioned it earlier in this conversation. What impact did that have on you in the pursuit for public service?
I think it kind of, like I said, I was retired. I didn't, I was kind of enjoying life, but then I realized that, man, what can I do to help people? And we actually had a round table. I was kind of around with NBC News at the time, and one of the I can't think of his name right now. We did a big roundtable about gun violence and shooting. And what really impacted me in the end is we had lots of anti-gun people and just the whole room of people talking. And in the end, we all agreed it wasn't a gun problem, it was a people problem. That's what we have. We have people. I think that really impacted me and said, yeah, you know what? We need good, strong leaders to make sure that we're making the right decisions for our future, right? And so that's kind of always my North Star. What are the decisions I'm making today going to benefit our kids and our grandkids later on down the road? So that's kind of the impact it left me.
Yeah. A few more questions. Sure. On this, you write in your bio, during and after the horrific event I witnessed, people from all beliefs and cultures uniting in a time of need. We have a crisis right now here in Alaska, a budget crisis. I believe all Alaskans can come together and make those conservative, fiscally responsible decisions that are required for a successful future. In a word, how do you describe Alaska's future?
Insanely bright.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm an eternal optimist here. We live in the greatest state, the greatest place in the world, right? And we're wealthy. We have money, right? But we haven't quite figured out how to address. We're a young state. I think that's what people don't realize. We're a relatively young state, and we're still like building, and we do have cost. But there's no other place in the world I want to live. Like I said, I've been around the world, and this is the place I want to make sure is the best place for our kids and grandkids. No matter if it's in Northway or Anchorage or Fairbanks or Barrow, what are we doing to make sure the people in those places have the tools they need to survive and live great lives? So that's my baseline.
Yeah. And my last question for you, I asked your counterpart in the majority of this exact same question, Senator Giesel, the Senate Majority Leader. Very broad question, but I think it's one that a lot of people have a lot of different answers for and is very valuable and impactful too. What does it mean to be Alaskan?
What does it mean to be an Alaskan? That's a tough question.
Yeah.
I'm just going to play off of how I grew up, where I grew up. To be an Alaskan is being recognizing different people, compassionate, independent, and very resilient, right? You have to have all those things to be an Alaskan. And if you don't, doesn't mean you're not one. Sure. But I believe those are, especially when you grow up in a village or somewhere, if you really look at how they survived, the resiliency these people had to survive in the climate that we live in, before modern time and stuff, and you're just like amazed, you're amazed. So I think being Alaskan is just being who you are and having those qualities, and sharing those with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for watching. We'll be back on your feeds Friday, but until then, please